Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Wendy with Creation Depot, and today I'm going to be showing you how to create a pattern in Illustrator. So let's start with the easy part. Creating the pattern in Illustrator is super easy. There's really not that much to it. When you start getting into the design part, it starts to get a little bit more complicated, but the actual creating of a repeating pattern in Illustrator, it's not that hard at all. So this is going to be our final look. This is what we are after to have a repeating pattern in Illustrator and what that's going to look like. But before we can even get started with this, let's walk this back a little bit and talk about where these images even came from. So this is not an ad specifically for deposit photos, but I will say I use depositphotos.com constantly because their photo library is actually very good, and this picture right here only cost me 83 cents. So I will have an affiliate link down below, but they're worth a checking out because, as we all know, stock photography, especially from like iStock Photo or Getty's images, they start to add up. So what I did was I just looked for a illustration for anything Victorian basically, and I came up with this really awesome set. So what I did was I downloaded it, and then I opened up the EPS that came with it and picked the ones that I wanted to mess with. So we'll choose this one, this one. I opened up a new artboard that was a perfect square. I pasted it in. I wondered where my tools went. All right, so I'm not 100% on this layout, but you know, it's a good place to start, and it will get us to the part that you care about the most, actually making the pattern. So what I will say is that it is helpful to have a full background on here, but not required. But basically what you want to do is select it all, group it. I'm using Control G, but you can always go up to Object and Group. And then over here, I'm gonna go grab my swatches panel, and then I'm gonna select that group and then just drag it over to the swatches panel. And you'll see it appear here in this really tiny. Now that we've got our swatch, I'm gonna double click it. There are other ways to get here, but this is the fastest. And it's gonna open up what's called your pattern options. And you will see the pattern that Adobe has put everywhere for you. This is what I was talking about with the background. Right now, I didn't have a background when I made that pattern, but sometimes it's more helpful to put it on something a little bit easier to read. So I'm gonna hit cancel, go over here, throw in a background, and see it's already making a pattern of the pattern. I'm just gonna make it, let's make it a blue. All right, and then I'm select it all again. And guess what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna drag it back over, right? So there's our soft blue one. Now I'm gonna double click this one and it will bring it up here. And now when it makes the pattern, it's a little easier to see what you're working with. So when you're looking at this, you might be like, oh wow, this outside part's great, but what is going on here with the double boxes in the middle? Well, let me explain. This blue box is the bounding box for your artwork, right? What you saw on the previous artboard. The black box here, this is actually where the new artboard would be. So like if you were to paste this pattern onto your artboard, it would actually start offset like this. You can change this simply by selecting all of it and just dragging it over to be on the artboard. And then when you let go, it will reset to everywhere. Now let me show you why Adobe kind of does the offsetting. The reason it does it initially, because it's registering that you have all this empty space right here between the edge of your artwork and the artboard, right? Here and here. And what that's going to end up doing is creating this wide space right here, right? And in this one, because I spaced everything out pretty evenly, it doesn't look that bad. Let's say things were up a little higher, you'd be like, you would have some straight up vertical and horizontal lines that just wouldn't look good. That's why. In this instance, we're gonna leave it like this. We're not gonna work with the offset, but that's what you're working with. So now everything is still grouped. So we're gonna go ahead and Shift Control G to ungroup it, click off of it, and now we're gonna work with the individual items. So just to show you that this is like a live thing happening, if I move one of the elements, it will shift it in the rest of the pattern, right? You see how it just moved it over? If I make it larger, it's gonna make it larger everywhere else. Now, this is the part I wanted to talk to you about creating depth in your patterns, because right now this is super busy. I mean, it's gonna be super busy no matter what we did because there's so many elements to put on here, but there's a way you can make it so it doesn't look quite so overwhelming, especially if you're gonna use this as a repeating background on like a website. So the first thing you wanna do is take your focal point and you're gonna knock this down to like 80. And then you're gonna follow suit with the rest of your items. All right, then stand back and look at it. What are the two things that really jump out at you right now? the center bottle and this down here. And even though this and this are the same opacity, they are still jumping out a whole lot. So the more detailed, probably the lower your opacity is going to have to be before everything kind of meshes well together. But we do want some things to be faded out more because it gives depth. So let's go ahead and knock this one down a little bit. Okay, that's looking a lot better. If you come over here to the pattern option, first of all, we should really name this. Let's say Victorian pattern. And then let's pop down here to your grid options. Your grid options, you'll be able to click down, right down there's your options. And then you can also go to brick by row, which is helpful if you have a super busy background like this. Having the brick background offsets everything. Because it's offset, it will actually let you kind of figure this out a little bit better in terms of this one to be matched up, always to be matched up with this bottle, for example. Offsetting it prevents that. And then it looks a little more random too. And then you can hop down to this one right here, and it can tell you how far off you want to offset it. Like, let's say I only want to offset it by 1/4. That introduces a little bit of randomness versus a whole lot where they're really staggered. If you pop down to hex by column, hexagon, I mean, this one gets super complicated, but man, the things you could do. Right, because it's a hexagon, it's like super random patterns, right? Like you could manipulate everything in here so that it just like nothing was, it would look like nothing is ever repeating. It's pretty cool. But if you go back to grid, you can set the width and the height of your grid. Mine's massive. I shouldn't have made it this big, but I did. Typically for the web, smaller is better. Like that's the king. You want it to load super fast. So you're probably gonna be working with something that's closer to like 200, 300 pixels wide. So overlapping is not gonna look like, I mean, I'll click on it to show you, but overlapping isn't gonna look like it's doing anything because all of our stuff is squarely within this box. If I had something hanging out here, this is what the overlapping does. Where do you want the overlap? Do you want this thing to be behind the next pattern or in front of it? Right? You see how it ducked behind? Like if I click off of it, it's now cut off, right? Up here, it's cut off. If I change this to over top, or you want the background to be in front of it, see, it puts it on top of the thing and just puts an opacity. Well, it's got an opacity on it, but it just puts it on top. So you could actually, like, if I was a little more artful with this and I put this like right here, it's saying that, hey, this one's considered the background to this one. Let's still put it on top. Now it's overlapping. It's in the way of the next pattern. And then the last one down here, you can show, this is just for your own visuals. You can say how many you want them to show by. 3 by 3 is fine for what I'm doing. And then you can say dim the copies to whatever you want. And the reason for that is so that you can see how, like what is the copy and what is the original. It's pretty obvious anyway, but just in case you wanted to. But if you switch this to 100% or just uncheck it, you'll get the true blue example of what it's going to look like on your page. Like this one we made blue. I have another one that I made in pink, that kind of thing. And then the last thing here is showing tile edge. This is your tile, but we put it directly on top of our artboard, so they're one and the same. But if you were to go up to view and select hide artboards, that goes away entirely, and you can kind of see it without any big boxes in your way, which is always helpful. So then let's go back up here. Let's bring those artboards back and I'll show you why. Let's pop over to done, brings it back. There's our pattern, right? This is actually the original things that we worked on, right? So we want to see the pattern. So let's go ahead and delete this. And you'll notice that that bounding box we created before the background, the swatch has already been applied to it. Do that. There's our pattern, right? And it looks pretty darn good. But you see, the artboard is right here. So if you were to like export this or save it out, this is the part that would only get exported. But I can shift this, I can do whatever I want, and it just adds more pattern. And that's, in a nutshell, how you make a pattern. It's pretty easy, and there's so much you can do with it, but I do implore you to work with like opacity and just making it so not in your face if it's for like a website, but I'm making it so that it's an accent to whatever you're trying to do. Keep it subtle, keep it low key. If this has been helpful for you, I really appreciate it if you put thanks Wendy down in the comments below. It really helps promote the video without, like, it's like leaving a virtual tip. Other than that, don't forget about deposit photos. They are a great resource. I'm not kidding, they are a great resource. I've used them for several years and they never let you down. That's it for me, guys. If there's any questions, also leave those in the comments and I'll talk to you in the next one. Take care, bye.